Hi, third grade boys and girls. I'm going to continue reading the Twits. We had left off before school. Mr. and Mrs. Twit were not very nice to each other, and they were playing a lot of tricks on each other. And so the last trick that was played was Mr. Twit had set it up to look like Mrs. Twit was shrinking. And so to stretch her out, he tied balloons to her. She started flying up, and then she figured out how to pop them one by one so she could slowly come down. She landed right on top of him, hitting him with her stick. She was not very happy. So let's continue on. The house, the tree, and the monkey cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison and not a window anywhere. Who wants windows? Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. Who wants every Tom, Dick, and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing? It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out of and not for looking into. What do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles, she used to say. They keep out nasty, noisy little children. Near the house you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side there is the big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You will hear about them later. So here's their house. Here's the little shed. Here's the big dead tree. And here is the monkey cage. Hug tight sticky glue. Once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before bird pie day, he would put the ladder up against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug-Tite, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug-Tite. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was bird pie day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were. Song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little Jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. Here's the picture of Mr. Twit is putting the Hug-Tite glue. Here is a picture with the birds stuck to the branches. And then, oh, poor birds. They're all in that bird pie. You can just see their little feet sticking out. 4 sticky little boys. On one Tuesday evening after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with Hug-Tite, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. And after a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb up it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as could be by the seats of their pants to the branches. There were no birds because the presence of the boys had scared them away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it'll have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," cried one of them. "He'll stew us alive," wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with carrots," cried the third. But the fourth little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Listen, I've just had an idea. We are only stuck by the seats of our pants. So," and here's a picture of Mr. Twit going up the ladder, and these poor boys are stuck to that hug-tight glue on the branches. "Quick! Unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all of a sudden tumbled out of the tree and ran for home with their bottoms winking at the sun. So you can just see how there's a picture of Mr. Twit, and then the pants are stuck to the branches. And we're going to end with this chapter. It's called The Great Upside Down Monkey Circus. Now, for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. There were Munkle and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train the monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down on their heads with their feet in the air. And here's a picture of the monkeys. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the very top. Then they even had to eat and drink upside down. And that was not an easy thing to do because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down it. In fact, it was almost impossible, but the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. All this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys, too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside-down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the 2 small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their heads, but Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day, and if they didn't do as they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick. Here's a picture of that. Poor monkeys. Okay, so think about what is going to happen next, and I will see you next time. Bye.